in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm really excited to welcome our next guest onto interview series, Shari Chernack. She is the VP Head of People at Industrious. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, thanks for having me, Christina, and I'm excited to participate in this conversation with you. So, Shari Chernack, she, her, hers, and a little about me. I am a native New Yorker living in Texas, a little bit on the personal side, with my husband and our pandemic puppy, who is now a full grown-up dog, and who brings us lots of joy. And I am, from a work standpoint, focused at the intersection of people, strategy, and transformation. I have spent time as a consultant and in-house, zigging and zagging to an extent between one and the other so that I could take on a lot of roles and opportunities that I found really exciting. The consulting side of my experience has given me a lot of breadth of exposure that I've found invaluable during the course of my career, not to mention the ability to meet wonderful clients and colleagues, many of whom are still valuable friends and mentors, even now into my third decade in my career. I'm dating myself. And then in-house, it's really been about going inside organizations going through transformation, restructuring, and now at Industrious, growth and scaling, and focusing on the people side of the business, which is really exciting and what motivates me. What did I want to be when I grow up as a child? I wanted to be a lawyer like my father. I admired him a lot. We were very close, and I think we shared certain personality traits, but he actually hated being a lawyer and encouraged me to find something that brings me a lot more joy. And I would say that I never planned for this career. I had a liberal arts education and then got my MBA and essentially figured out what I was good at and what I enjoyed. So sometimes the path that we take and the path that we love is not necessarily the path that we imagine.
Thank you for sharing your kind of journey and also providing that context as well. I have a lot of kind of questions around your experience as a people executive and the work you're doing now, but what else would you say defines you?
I love to make an impact. So whether I am evaluating a role and deciding whether I should take it and whether I would enjoy it, or whether I'm thinking about what to do of the many priorities and opportunities that I have to tackle various types of work within a role, I always look at what is going to deliver the maximum impact. And I want to make an impact in the sense that I want an organization to be better. I want people to be happier based on the work that I did. And I see my role as, in some ways, a hybrid between being an advocate for our people and taking care of our company and making sure that we have a people function and a level of people leadership capability that will serve the company well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of making an impact, I think that requires long-term strategy and commitment. And that's something that I definitely want to do as well. What would you say is the kind of next problem or situation you're currently trying to solve to really make an impact?
I wouldn't say it's so much of a problem as it is just the stage in which we find ourselves at Industrious. The organization and is one in which there are many people who are fairly early in their careers. We have a fairly young workforce, and there's an interest in growth paths and career paths. So for me, the next challenge / opportunity is really about thinking about what do those growth paths look like for people. And when I think about growth paths versus career paths, I think about ways in which people can grow in their roles. I think about ways in which people can potentially move laterally, can explore different areas of the company. Everyone wants something different. So I think people instinctively think about, how do I move up and I'm a manager today, and the next year I'm a director, and then in a couple of years maybe I'm a vice president. That is one path, but there are many other paths to growth and to impact using my own barometer. So I not only want to think about what are the many different ways in which people can continue to grow and maximize their impact, but how do I help people understand and really spark the conversations and the development journey that will lead them there.
Yeah, I think everybody has different career goals. Really taking the time to actively listen and understand how you can invest in people as well is so important. And I would love to know too, since you shared it's kind of the beginning of your journey at Industrious as a new executive, where do you prioritize where to start in your onboarding process when there's so many different priorities?
Sure. In my onboarding process, the most important thing for me to do, especially being the head of people, but I think in any role, is really to meet my colleagues at all levels of the organization, to understand where they're at, to understand how I can help them and how we can work together. And that's not just leaders, but it's people at every level of the organization. And one of the things that was really cool, my role was vacant for a little while. And so when I joined, there were people from within our business operations or from parts of the company where they might not have been on my onboarding plan, but they reached out and they said, hey, let me tell you what I'm doing within my location, or let me tell you about an idea that I had, or I work in such and such part of the business, but learning and talent are actually great passions of mine. So it's not only who's on my onboarding plan, but how can I listen and how can I hear from a breadth of voices and perspectives within my organization. I would say the other part is really, Industrious is a co-working company. So it was also important to visit a number of our locations. And that was important so that I can understand what does it look like? What do our different locations look like? How do our people who work in our locations, how do they experience their day-to-day? And I actually started just as Omicron was becoming more of an issue. So that's actually an area where I've got some more work that I'd like to do. I'd like to spend more time in our locations, more time with our people across the country, whereas I might spend more time on a day-to-day basis currently with people more in our corporate center. And I would say the third area of priority from an onboarding standpoint is it's impossible to have impact without really understanding the business strategy. So I asked for a number of specific strategy conversations, and particularly around the different types of products and what does their roadmap look like, so that I can understand where we're going as a company and think about how the people team can enable that.
Yeah, I think that modeling of behavior that you are kind of going out and having these conversations with folks, seeing how people experience the employer brand at the different locations also is really important. And I think in creating kind of pathways and enabling success for folks, we're talking about kind of that overarching theme, and it's in the title of our show, Company Culture. In your experience, what are kind of qualitative and quantitative ways we can really think about measuring company culture as this dynamic thing that we're cultivating?
I think from a qualitative standpoint, it's great to measure it at both the micro level and the macro level. So having conversations, making sure that leaders are listening to people, picking up on certain feelings that they have, anxieties that people might have, is really important. Asking people how they're doing, sometimes bringing people together for focus groups or sessions in which they really talk about the culture and how they're experiencing it from a qualitative point of view. From a quantitative point of view, there are many opportunities, thinking about surveys as the most basic, looking at engagement and attrition as measures of culture, but also in looking at tying culture to actual data and metrics around the business, I think is really important, because that's what takes culture from something that people think is kind of soft and squishy to something that is actually really impactful. So going back to my previous in-house role, we had safety as one of our core values.
Yeah.
We had customer commitment as one of our core values. And we were able to see from a safety standpoint, the number of our recordable incidents dropping as we focused as an organization around culture. From a customer commitment standpoint, we were able to see a significant increase year over year in customer renewals. So that's when I think culture, especially for some of those leaders who might not be, culture in some ways is almost it's almost like speaking a certain language, and not every leader speaks it as a native speaker. So I think for those leaders, being able to tie it to how the business is doing in certain areas that are influenced by culture could be among the most meaningful ways to measure it.
Yeah, when you take care of your talent, when you have that accountability in place in terms of objectives and goals, and you're measuring that progress, it also impacts the business, because people are your greatest asset. They're on the front lines, talking to clients, talking to customers, and your internal advocates. In terms of, one of the values you mentioned for a company you used to work at was safety. That's something that we definitely believe in as well, both physical and psychological safety at work. In your past experiences, how can organizations really identify proactively hidden dangers, whether it's toxic managers or department misaligned goals or values, proactively find them by empowering employees to speak up and have that psychological safety?
So I think some of the ways in which I talked about measuring culture could also yield a lot of insight about that. So everything from asking people how they're feeling and listening and surveying people, looking at engagement results, you can see a lot of differences manager by manager, and some of those differences may be attributable to managers and some a little bit less so. In my previous in-house role, we actually had manager effectiveness dashboards where we looked at about 10 or so items in our engagement survey that we decided were 50% or more attributable to managers. So around team decision making and autonomy, feeling like people belonged on a team, questions that started with my manager. So my manager values me, my manager cares about me as a person, and so forth. And we looked at those to understand managers. I think more broadly, there are also having conversations about performance, both at the company level, as well as looking at individual and team performance through a kind of performance management or performance coaching and feedback process can also yield a lot of insight. And I think having a whole listening strategy in which we look at how people are feeling and what they're thinking from the time they enter the organization to the time they leave, and maybe even beyond as alumni, I think you can get a lot of data about and insight, more importantly than data, about how people are feeling and what may be driving how they're feeling. And especially if those feelings are changing over time, you can pinpoint some areas that might need help or attention.
Yeah, asking and continuing to ask how people are feeling, what their feedback is, and making sure you're proactively kind of getting people to respond to those points at different points of their career with the organization. And where you are on day one is very different than 2 years as well. And just making sure that you're, again, making that intention important too. I think similar to other relationships, trust is a big piece of feeling comfortable giving that feedback in a lot of different ways. Some organizations say they have an open door policy environment, but we know some people just don't feel comfortable sharing their feedback for whatever reason, if it's a past experience. or just something that they need to build up to as well. What are some methods you have used to build trust with your organizations and encourage folks to surface positive feedback and also issues to HR or people teams?
I think it's important to have a number of different feedback mechanisms, to your point, and that not everybody, I mentioned that a number of people reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to share my point of view on X. And I have no doubt that some of them would probably reach out to tell me the things that they were finding wrong within the organization. But I think it's important to have feedback that people can offer with a greater degree of anonymity as well, because some people, to your point, will otherwise be reluctant to speak up. I've also found and used, I think, to pretty positive outcomes, networks of peers to surface how people on their teams are feeling. So whether it's a change network around a particular project, or it's a culture or ambassador network or committee, having a sufficient number of people to provide deep reach into the organization, who can come to leaders whose job it is to be trusted by their peers and to surface feedback for leaders to come to them and say, hey, I need to give you a little bit of an update on what's going on within my team, because you might not hear it otherwise. So I think having a variety of methods and really encouraging people to use the one that feels the most appropriate for them.
Yeah, offering those avenues of support and making sure people know that they are there too. I think that a lot of people, on teams are going through a multitude of different things at work or outside of work as well, as full people. And I think a lot of folks have experienced burnout and high stress over the past 2 years. That is job related and other responsibilities, if they are caretakers, working parents, all of these things that are happening. In your experience, what tools and resources are really important to provide for managers to help proactively prevent that burnout for their teams?
I think the first two are deeply human tools, which are empathy and willingness to listen. And those are important for fairly obvious reasons. People managers need to understand when their team members are feeling burnt out. I think also the ability to sense it, and that can be through interaction. It could be through watching people. It could also be through seeing somebody sending emails or Slacks, or some kind of whatever your instant messaging preferences inside an organization, at hours that are really late, not just once in a while, but frequently. So an example I have is, last week, I think it was, I had a project that I was really excited about, but it was, and was interested in a particular technology and the benefits it would bring to the organization. And there were just too many things on the plates of people that would have needed to get behind it and be involved. And it was something, since it was not mission critical, that I decided to defer, because I think people managers need to make choices. There's always a lot of work to do. There are never enough people to do it. And so being able to listen, sometimes people will be overt in saying, I feel burnt out, I need help. Can you help me? Can you take a few things off my plate, or can I take a few days off? And that's something people should do, but also people managers should be on the lookout. What are the signs? What are the symptoms? And if they don't know, they can work with a member of their HR or people team, or maybe with other leaders who seem to have a particular talent for taking care of their people and identifying burnout.
Yeah, I think empathy is also really important for everyone on an individual level. And then in terms of managers, I think you're right in terms of making sure that you are protecting their time, having those conversations, and really being an advocate for the team as well. I think that is really important also, just to also build that trust and build that company culture on the team as well from a department level too. In terms of March 2022, we're in Women's History Month and International Women's Day as well. This year's theme for the Global International Women's Day is Break the Bias. How have you seen leaders and organizations really interrupt or break bias?
I actually learned a lot about breaking the bias in my last organization. I was most recently a consultant, and I learned a lot about some of the ways in which people talk about team members in performance management, calibration sessions, in talent reviews, and so forth. And this can be women, it can be people of color, it can be people who are introverts as opposed to extroverts. That there's a lot of style and tone policing in those conversations, and that stepping back a little bit and thinking about who created the rules of what good looks like. Often it was people who were in power, decades ago, which just based on how diversity has increased over the last several decades means that it often was not the people who defined what good looks like were not women. They may not have been people of color, and they may also have tended towards greater extroversion. So understanding that and then redefining, what are we really going to talk about? Are we going to talk about style? Are we going to talk about presence? Or are we able to actually be a little bit more rigorous in how we define if there is a growth opportunity or a challenge in terms of the way somebody is doing their work that prevents them from delivering their best work, let's talk about that. So is it so-and-so doesn't have presence, or in this meeting, maybe somebody needs to get to the point a little bit more quickly, and we can coach them to do that. So it's also then a move from a kind of negative comment that really makes it hard for that person to dig out of the hole that they're in, to moving towards an observation that can be coached in that person. And so that's a real opportunity for organizations to break the bias, and it's a quick win. It's something that every leadership team can commit to doing.
Yeah, that reframe of who made the rules, why are we doing this, why is this person kind of performing or not performing, really asking curiosity-based questions too. I think that takes a lot of internal work and self-awareness too, and then also acting on it to make that systemic change of breaking the bias overall in your role or industry. And I think that's impactful for everyone as well. I know that we have seen a lot of innovation too in terms of making systems more equitable, redesigning to be more inclusive, which is really great. And over the past 2 years as well, that has kind of sped up the process too. What would you say you are looking forward to, and why, for this kind of future work that we're all building?
I'm looking forward on a personal level to a year from now, and hopefully I've moved the needle for the people in my organization and for my organization overall. There's been a huge amount of trust invested in me, and I really want to maximize the impact that I can make based on the trust that has been granted to me. In terms of what I look forward from a future of work standpoint, I really like when organizations think about who are those non-traditional candidates that we can bring into the organization. What is that kind of challenger talent that we need to bring into our organization so that we don't get complacent and that we don't end up having a little bit of a closed loop type of environment in which new ideas don't enter. And I think there's so much opportunity there. There's been a lot of progress, but I think especially now that many organizations are dispersed, that we have a war for talent, and in many cases a talent shortage. I think there's such an opportunity for many organizations to be really creative in terms of thinking about how they fill roles, whether it's with certain types of people, whether it's people who might only have a certain amount of time to commit, or who may play a certain kind of role in an organization other than being a full-time employee. So I think there are really many creative ways to think about talent And I look forward to seeing that unfold over the next couple of years.
Yeah, there's a huge need for creativity, and also looking forward to checking back in with you in a year or two and having, a conversation around kind of the changes you've seen as well, and all of the strategies that you're investing in and talking about too. Is there anything that I didn't ask in regards to kind of, company culture, or maybe underscoring 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope listeners bring with them after hearing our conversation today?
I really enjoyed the conversation. I would just say to your listeners that everyone can shape culture. You don't necessarily have to have a head of or chief title. You don't have to be in the HR or people function. There are many ways and opportunities for people to shape culture, from sharing their voices to raising their hands to volunteer to being part of a focus group or sharing candid feedback in a survey or an anonymous forum. So find the way that works for you. Maybe there are many or more than one, and make your culture what you want it to be. Or do your part and see what that brings you in terms of your own joy and the impact you can deliver.
I love that call to action. Everybody has a part to play in creating the places that we want to work, and I think that also gives us ownership as well. Thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you. I enjoyed our conversation.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.